Also, we'll explain why do sine and cosine not have an asymptote, but the others for trig function do. So, I will use the unit circle ratio to explain this. First, we'll look at sine, and as you can see, sine equal to equal to y, or y over 1. And because sine value can be any number that plug into y, so there's no restriction for y and what it should be. Same with cosine. We have cosine equal x, or x over 1, as we remember. And because there's no restriction for x as well, so x can be any value, and that gonna be the value to graph cosine graph. And as you can see, sine and cosine have no restriction on their value, so there's no asymptote. For cosecant, we know that cosecant equal 1 over sine, which means it's equal 1 over y. And sine and y at the same time are the one that dictate whether or not the graph will have an asymptote, and it does. Because when sine equals 0, it will give us a 0 value. Sine of 0 will give us a 0 value, and 1 over 0 will be undefined. And because it's undefined, we will not have any value touching that part of the graph. And I explain why we have to draw the asymptote in order to show that the graph will not cross the line. Also, when sine equals 180 degrees, it also gives us a 0 value of y. So 1 over 0 is undefined, and that is another asymptote. For secant, we know that 1 over cosecant is the same with 1 over x. And x and cosecant will dictate how to graph this secant graph. Because when cosecant of 90 degrees equals 0, this graph is undefined because 1 over 0 is undefined. When cosine of 270 equals 0, so 1 over 0 will give us an undefined answer. Because of the undefined answer, secant graph cannot have any point that touching the asymptote line, because it does not belong to the graph. Tangent equal to sine over cosine, and sine over cosine is the same thing as y over x. Well, y can be any value because on the numerator. However, we know that the denominator cannot be equal to 0 because it's undefined. So what will make x become 0? Well, cosine of 90 degrees equals 0. Cosine of 270 degrees equals 0. So these points making two asymptotes for tangents. For cotangent, we know that is cosine over sine, and it's equal to x over y. Now this time, x will not as important as y, because when y equals 0, the graph will have an asymptote. Well, sine of 0 equals 0, and sine of 180 equals 0. So when y equals 0, x over 0 will give us an undefined answer. And because it's undefined answer, the graph cannot touch that point or touch the line. So we should draw, and that's explain why cosecant, secant, tangent, cotangent have an asymptote in order to show that the graph does not have that value or that point does not belong to the trig graph. Thank you for watching.